Alright, okay, so at this point you're more or less ready to run. You know about the different programming softwares and the manuals, you've managed to install it, and you're more or less comfortable with moving around in the Mitsubishi platform and programming softwares. So let's go to GXWorks 2, and we're all good. We have installed it and we know where to find the manuals and we have all the icons. So you're all ready, and here's a scenario, and this is something that I've faced in the field whereby I was working on a project, and the project that I was working on was basically getting towards the end, and that project was on another PLC and not Mitsubishi. And then someone came up to me and said, hey, there's more work, but it's on Mitsubishi. Have you ever worked on Mitsubishi before? And like most PLC programmers, I said yes, because we all think that a PLC is a PLC, which is true, until I then had to go on the Mitsubishi programming software, or the interface, which was GXWorks 2, and it was very confusing at the time, and I didn't know what to do exactly. And different companies have different operating practices. Some companies will keep backups of the PLC programs that you're gonna be working on, and some companies don't. And in that case, what you most likely have to do is you're going to have to upload the program from the working PLC. And in my scenario, that was more or less the case, and that's what I had to do. And that's where the confusion started for me. And then it was very embarrassing. It was like, okay, you don't know what you're doing, so you might not get this gig. So anyway, what I had to do at that point was I needed to use the programming software to upload the program from the PLC. And having never done it in Mitsubishi, I was like, I'm just going to use the ABCs, which you set up a connection interface, and then after setting up the connection interface, you can then go online with the PLC. After going online with the PLC, you can then either choose to upload or download to the PLC. I thought it was going to be simple as that, but then yeah, it wasn't. It was a bit tricky. So in a scenario whereby you already have a PLC and that PLC is running a program, but then there's no backup, and this is a very common scenario that you will find, or maybe someone else was working on the PLC project and they left, and then you need to take over. So it's something that usually happens all the time, that you're not going to have a backup. And with Mitsubishi, what you then need to do is just bearing in mind that currently, as I'm making this video, I do not have a physical PLC. So some of the examples that I'm going to do will be through a simulation. In that case, all you need to do is just open up GXWorks 2, or assuming if that controller is going to be on GXWorks 2, or whatever that you might guess it to be. But I would go for GXWorks 2, because GXWorks 2 is usually sort of like the middle ground, whereby most controllers that are still out there in the field would be using GXWorks 2. Well, that knowledge, goes as far as how much experience I have. Do not hold me to it. So what you're gonna do is open up GXWorks 2, and then you're gonna go online, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna say read from PLC. After selecting that, it is then gonna ask you which CPU series you want to read from. So at this point, you're gonna go to your physical PLC on the panel. You're then gonna look and see the series of the CPU, and once you got that, you're just gonna come and select it. So in my case, it was a Q CPU. Oh yeah, look at this. This is nice. So the moment you select a CPU that is not supported, it gives you this error, which is great. So in my case, it was a Q mode CPU, but whatever CPU that you choose will need to correspond to what you have in the field. And then you can just say okay. Then once you hear it, then brings up the transfer setup connection. So basically, this is the pop-up where you set the connection interface to your particular CPU, and these are the various physical connection interfaces that you can have working. So most of the time I've used serial and USB, and for an FX I've used Ethernet. You can then click on serial, so you double click on serial and USB, and then depending on the type of cable that you're using, if you're using a serial cable to connect to that particular CPU, you can then select the RS232C, and then you can then specify the COM port where that serial cable will be connected to on your laptop. And then you can just do this by going on device manager and then looking at the COM number that your serial cable is connected to. On the other CPUs, they use USB, and USB is very simple, because all you need to do is just click USB and then OK, and you don't have to specify anything. So at this point, I'm just going to stick to USB. And the cool thing to note from this is that at the top, it tells you that this is the PC side, and at the bottom, this is the PLC side. So what you're setting up here on the top, this is related to your engineering workstation. And whatever you set here on the PLC side, this is related to your PLC. The one that is highlighted in yellow, that indicates the interface that you are currently using, and that is going to be in use when you click OK here at the bottom. Also, although we're not going to be using Ethernet, just to show the example is, so on your engineering workstation, you will then have an Ethernet card, like your onboard Ethernet card. If you click on that, then gives you a warning that now you're going to switch from serial to USB, and do you want to do that? You can then just say yes, and then the moment you click on that, it then highlights it in yellow that you are now using the onboard Ethernet card on your engineering workstation. So if you have these other CCIC or CC-Link card mounted on your engineering workstation, obviously you can use those. And if you double click on this, then these would be the parameters that you set for your onboard Ethernet card on your engineering workstation. With Ethernet, you can then have options of selecting how you are connecting, how the PLC rather will be connected to your engineering workstation. And there are two ways that you can do that as far as I've seen stuff go, or as far as I've seen what's out there in the field. And this is pretty much common with other PLCs as well, is that you can have an onboard Ethernet port on the CPU itself. And if you select this, you then be connecting to the onboard Ethernet port of the CPU. And these are the different options that you can have set up for that particular network where the CPU is connected to. And then you can specify the IP address. But in terms of what's the difference between the two, I'm also yet to find out. But I know that this is an option, and it has worked once for me in a project that I was doing with the FX series of CPU. I just don't remember exactly what I did, but I know that at the end it ended up working. So that's the one way. And then the other method, typically if you look at a PLC rack, you're going to have your CPU, and then you're going to have a comms module. Then that comms module can be any type of interface depending on which network the PLC is connected to. You can then also have an Ethernet module. So this will be a module on your main rack that is connecting your main rack to some Ethernet network, whatever network that you want your PLC to be connected to. So instead of using the onboard Ethernet port, you would rather have an Ethernet module. And so if I have a cable connected from my engineering workstation, and then that cable is then going to some Ethernet module on the PLC rack, I'll then select this Ethernet module as an option rather than using the onboard Ethernet port, which is on the CPU. Again, because now I'm going to be switching interfaces. So now my cable was going from my engineering workstation to the CPU. Now it's going to be going to the Ethernet module. So it means that the connection will change. So therefore, that's why the system is warning you again that what you're doing is a connection change. So you can just say yes, and then it will then highlight the Ethernet module that you're going to be using to communicate with the PLC. And in that case, you can then just double click on this and set the Ethernet module that you're going to be using. And for this, the options that you can get is these Ethernet modules, and then you can then specify the IP address of that Ethernet module and the related parameters for that Ethernet module, and then you can have OK. So once this has been selected, you can then move ahead with connecting to the PLC.